Hey everybody, Justin White here, and you're about to listen to episode 5 of Power Forward. And if you've ever wondered what it's like to go from being a professional athlete to the business world, well, this episode is for you. Sean McHugh joined our sales team in 2016 after a football career that took him from Penn State to several stops around the NFL and ultimately to the pinnacle for any football player, the Super Bowl. You'll learn about the many twists and turns that Sean experienced during his career and how he applies those lessons to his job today. Let's put the pads on and get after it. Power Forward comes your way right now. The primary purpose of this podcast series is to inform, entertain, and educate. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast series do not constitute legal or other professional advice, opinions, or endorsements of any kind.
This is Power Forward.
All right, welcome back to Power Forward. My name is Justin White, alongside my co-host, Mateen Cleaves. Mateen, what's going on, my friend?
Life is good, baby. I'm living a dream, and please don't wake me up.
All right, I think I've heard that line before, but we will proceed nonetheless. I got to be honest with you, I'm a little bit conflicted about our guest for this episode.
Okay.
I'm pumped about the fact that he's a fellow native of the great state of Massachusetts.
All right.
But I'm a Patriots fan.
Oh.
And our guest today played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and there's a little bit of a rivalry there, but we'll allow it. Our guest today is Sean McHugh, team lead and senior account executive. Sean, welcome to Power Forward.
Appreciate you guys having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're going to be able to get along, right, despite my Patriots allegiances and the fact that you played for the Steelers?
Well, I mean, we can overcome that. The Michigan State with Mateen and Penn State thing is going to be more of an issue, but
that's going to be interesting.
We'll figure that one out.
Yeah, for sure. You played in the NFL, as you mentioned. You played football at Penn State. First question I got to ask you is, how'd you end up working for a mortgage company?
Yeah, so it's kind of the way things work out. When I got done playing, I kind of bounced around and tried to figure out what it was I wanted to do, for the rest of my life. And I knew early on in my career it was never going to be the kind of thing where I didn't have to work again. And I'm the kind of guy, too, where I knew I couldn't just sit around. So I wanted to do something. So I kind of just reached out to my dad, who does some work in Southeast Michigan, to try to get some networking and contacts. And my dad had met Matt very briefly, kind of in passing, and he reached out back to me with a couple of names. And then at the bottom of his email, he said, but I want you to reach out to this guy first. So again, only met him very briefly, but was very impressed with what Matt, had going on, kind of his drive, his vision, and thought with the athletic connection, it'd be a good place to at least start. So I met Matt. We talked. I took some time off after that meeting, and after talking to my wife and, exploring some other options, I just kind of came back to it and I said, this, I think, is, what I want to at least explore after seeing the culture, not understanding the mortgage business that much, but understanding the training that was available to me to get me caught up, and kind of took a leap of faith, and really glad I did.
As a former athlete and having that sports background and obviously being used to competition, were you drawn to the competition aspect of being part of a sales team?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I compete in everything I do. I mean, I compete with Siri on my way to work in the morning. When she tells me it's going to take me 58 minutes, I'll get there in 57. And in sales, obviously, you have a bunch of, guys and gals who are all competitive. No one wants to be at the bottom. Everyone wants to be at top. When you have people, that are like-minded like that, I always use the expression iron sharpens iron. So the harder the guy next to me is working, the harder I have to work. And it goes back and forth. I think that's kind of what has helped build us to where we are today.
Let me push the rewind button right quick, because you a lot of people, we come to that, a lot of ex-athletes, we come to that fork in the road. It's like, what do I do now? When did you realize that, I'm going to hang up the cleats and then go into business?
Yeah, so after the Super Bowl year with Pittsburgh, I went through training camp, and I ended up having knee surgery right at the end of training camp, and I spent that next year on injured reserve. And I was always the kind of player where I needed to be 110% to even have an opportunity to make a team. I was talking with Justin earlier, and I said, a guy like Calvin Johnson, for example, at 75%, he's probably still the best player on the field. Mm-hmm. I wasn't that guy. So once I kind of had those, the knee issues, and I tried to come back for another training camp, it kind of dawned on me that this is a good place, to make that transition. I was relatively healthy. Fortunately, I never had any kind of really serious head injuries. My wife might, disagree with you. So I figured this is a good time. I had my run. My kids were getting a little bit older. It was a little bit more challenging to kind of bounce around and do the, the tryout circuit, if you will, as a lot of guys do later in their career. So I decided, I had my education from Penn State, and it was time to make that transition.
Sean, the parallels between success on the field and success in the business world. You mentioned the fact that we have a heavy sports culture here. There's several guys here that used to play professional sports, college athletes as well. What are the biggest parallels that you see that you've taken from your career as a professional athlete and translated now over to having success in the business world?
There's really a couple. I think, number one is, and especially for me, the structure. Right. So when you become an athlete, I'm sure Mateen can relate. You learn how to organize your day. You get into a routine. You learn how to be really effective within that routine. So that's piece one. Number two, though, and probably the most important one is, the ability to work through adversity. That's, to me, is sports. That's business, right? So everyone talks about working hard, and we have, 4,000 people. I don't think there's a harder working company in, the nation, not just in mortgages. But when you're in the sports, you learn how to overcome the adversity through your work ethic. And so that's kind of the attitude I've taken to this job is there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. But if you come in every single day with that grind kind of attitude, things always seem to work themselves out over time.
And you played in the NBA. I mean, I played in the NBA.
It's just a habit.
Yeah, you played in the NFL. And you were great at what you did, okay? You mastered football. And you come into the mortgage industry, you know nothing about it. It's like you're a rookie all over again, and you're trying to figure it out. How, what was your mindset when you first came in here at UWM?
Yeah, so, honestly, sitting in that first day of AE training, if you will, after the first couple hours, I kind of sat here and was like, I might be in the wrong building. Everyone around me, a lot of people around me had come from, the mortgage industry, whether it be a competitor, whether they were independent brokers at some point and wanted to join this team. I came in without any of that mortgage experience. So it was overwhelming. But going back to the sports, I always knew it's like switching teams, remember what got you there. And for me, it was that drive. It was the work ethic. It might take me a little bit of studying outside of the normal training to get caught up. And on top of that, we had trainers, the training here, for people who don't know, is, always the highest ranked in the country across all industries, who took extra time to help me, to get me brought up to speed, so that by the time we hit week 2 or 3, I was kind of right in line with the rest of my group.
Sean, when you go back, and I mean way back to when you first started playing football, and obviously it led you to Penn State and then onto a career in the NFL, did you think that growing up you had a legitimate chance to go to a big-time football school like Penn State and then eventually have a shot at playing in the NFL?
It really wasn't on my radar growing up as a young kid. I didn't come from a sports family. We didn't have a team we rooted for consistently. The Browns had actually left town. I grew up in Cleveland, and the Browns kind of left town in those crucial years where you're getting into being a sports fan. So we kind of followed Ohio State. But my dad and I would watch the games, and we'd go out and play catch at halftime out in the yard. But it really wasn't until probably my freshman year in high school when my coach sat me down, and he had coached some former Division I athletes and said, based on your freshman year, I think if we continue on this progression, you have an opportunity to do something special and play some big time college football. And that was kind of really the first time it entered my mind and kind of changed the way I approached my preparation and how I thought about football.
What was it specifically about football? I mean, was it simply the fact that you were a big kid and you could go out there and physically impose your will on the opponent, or was there something specific about that game that drew you to it?
I really think the physicality of it. Obviously, genetically, I was kind of predetermined where, I wasn't going to be a golfer or a baseball player, when you're 6'5", and I always joke that I'm lighter now than I was when I was a junior in high school. So it kind of was a natural fit, but there's something about football and being able to go, man versus man, who's going to be tougher, who's going to be stronger, who's going to fight harder. And like you said, to be able to impose your will on another person, there's something kind of primal about it. And that kind of drew me to it. The individual battles within the game is what I found so intriguing.
Well, we know who not to mess with here at UWL.
I mean, he's still a very big dude. Go ahead, Mateen.
Oh, yeah. And let me ask you this because, okay, you get better and better and better in high school. Then you start getting recruited. How did you chose to go to Penn State? What was it? Was there any other schools that was in the mix? And what was the ultimate, what was the thing that made you choose Penn State?
Yeah, so it was, the first kind of checkbox was the geographical location.
Okay.
I was very close to my family. And, I knew if I went out to a school on the West Coast, they weren't going to get a chance to see me. I wouldn't get a chance to come home as much. So right away, I kind of narrowed it down to the Big Ten schools. And then I threw Notre Dame in there, just to mix it up a little bit. But it really came down at the end to Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, and Penn State.
Pretty good options to have.
Heavy hitters.
Yeah, no, you really can't go wrong. Any way you go, I'm sure had I decided a different school, I would have had an equally as awesome experience. But we went to Penn State for a visit. I have family in Pennsylvania going into my senior season. And after being on the campus one more time, it just kind of felt like home. And then the other piece of advice I got from my parents were if you weren't going to play football, pick a school you'd still want to be at. Because as we all know, as fast as, sports come, they can be over in an instant, especially in a sport like football with, how prevalent injuries are. So I decided, if I weren't going to play football, I'd still love to be a student at Penn State. Then you add in the academics and the history. It was just a kind of a natural fit.
So you're all everything in high school. You get recruited by some of the top programs in the country. You go to Penn State. What's it like once you get there and you see a bunch of other guys who have similar type skill sets to you?
Humbling. It's very, very humbling. I went to a small school, and when I came into high school, the high school was on like a 40-game losing streak, and they hired an awesome coach, Mark Imarino, who's still there today and turned that program around. But I was always the big fish in the small pond. I was always the biggest kid on the field. I graduated with 130 kids. And like you said, you get to Penn State, and everyone was the same person you were at their individual high school. So now your accolades, everyone has the All-State, everyone has the Player of the Year, everyone was the go-to guy. So realizing that now you got to kind of reestablish who you are, at the same time kind of drove me to, outwork even my teammates I was coming in with, because I wasn't okay being average. I still wanted an opportunity, to have that same feeling I had in high school, which obviously is a little bit more challenging at that level. But it also really drove me to continue, what got me there in the first place.
And let me ask you this question, because this threw me for a loop. You're used to being recruited, so everybody's patting you on the back and they're telling you how much they love you. And then you get to college and you're just a snotty-nosed freshman.
That's it.
And so how did you deal with that transition? Because it was definitely it was a challenge for me to make that jump from high school to college, especially after being recruited and telling them they telling you how much they love you, and then you're just a snotty-nosed freshman and the coach is hollering at you for everything that you did.
I got there in our first day of trading table. I'm looking for the filet and lobster tail, and I'm like, what happened to all of that?
Here's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
But, you're exactly right. And that's one of the things that even, my guys that I still stay in touch with, we talk about today, is how you are when you're being recruited. It's almost, it can be difficult to not let your thought of yourself, your ego, your head get too big. Because when you do come in, like you said, we call them grunts. You're just a grunt. And you have your established players who are already there, and now your job is to make those players better, not the other way around. So it's definitely a culture shock, and I always say the transition from high school to college was much more challenging than the transition from college to the NFL. I don't know if it's the same way in the NBA.
No, you're right.
But it's certainly that leap was much more significant than it was going to the next level.
And yet, Sean, you experienced some early success at Penn State. You were one of two players to earn a varsity letter as a true freshman?
Correct, yep. So it was actually me and my roommate.
Wow.
Guy by the name of Sam Rue. He's a defensive end out of Ohio as well. And, we were the two true freshmen who got to be on the field. And, a lot of it was in mop-up duty and special teams, but it was a great, way for me to, kind of have a little bit of reward from the work during training camp, because it's challenging to just practice and not get a chance to actually play in a game like a lot of redshirt freshmen go through. So having that opportunity was really fun. It's still something I'm very proud of today.
And then take us through the progression from there, kind of the way the rest of your career played out at Penn State, because you brought up dealing with adversity. I know that some things that happened after that really tested you as a person.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So when I was in high school, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She had kind of gone back and forth with it, was in remission, and then it would come back and then be in remission for another period of time. So going into my sophomore season, it was actually our fourth game of the year. I just took it over the starting role. We were playing no other than Michigan at Penn State. Caught a little pass in the flat and, took a hit low and had a broken leg. So during that time, I was going to be out the rest of the season. My mom's cancer had come back and was much more aggressive. And then February following the season, I still remember it like it was yesterday. I called into our academic advisor's office. He said, "You need to call your dad." So I knew my dad and mom were in Florida. So if my dad needs me to call him, something's not right. And that's when I got the phone call that, hey, things took a turn for the worse. We need you and your sisters to get down to Florida ASAP. And kind of going back to the Penn State thing, it's still one of the greatest blessings of my life is being at Penn State with the people I was around to help me in that time of my life. But my mom ended up passing away. I'm recovering from a broken leg. You're just kind of sitting there, and as a 19-year-old kid away from home, it's like, what now? And that's when, I really just leaned on my teammates, my coaches, my family to kind of help get me through that. But it's just one of those, building experiences. You can overcome that. Then, the day-to-day grind of coming in and, having a tough situation at work all of a sudden, puts back into perspective that it's really not that bad.
Around here, we talk a lot about, being relationship-driven and how personal relationships really matter. When you think back to that time and some of the things you were going through with the injury and then the loss of your mom, were there certain relationships, people around you that helped you get through those times?
Oh, no question. I was very lucky to come in with a really big recruiting class. We had, I think, like 29 players, 25 on scholarship. We had 4 gray shirt guys that came in a little bit early. And we developed a bond very, very quickly. So I had all those guys to lean on. But as soon as I got that news, my first phone call was to Fran Ganner, who was our offensive coordinator. My second phone call was to Joe Paterno. And at that time, what strikes me the most looking back on it is that I wasn't Sean McHugh, the tight end or the fullback. I was Sean McHugh, the 19-year-old kid, and that's how they treated me. Genuine care. It wasn't about football. It wasn't about when you're going to be back. It wasn't about we have spring ball coming up at any time soon. It was what do we need to do to help you through this situation. I'd love to share the story. When we were at the funeral back in Cleveland, I had been out of school, for a week or two since, my mom passed. And we pull up to St. Joan of Arc Church in Chagrin Falls, Ohio. I'll never forget it. There's 2 of those big, like, Greyhound-type tour buses. And no one kind of really knew what was going on. And so, we're walking into the church, and the bus doors open. And there was about 65 of my teammates from Penn State filing off the bus, in their Penn State Letterman's blazers with the Penn State logo on it, filed into the back of the church. Sat through the service, 45 minutes to an hour, got back on the bus and went back to State College just to show support for a teammate. And that's, all thought about maybe you should have gone to Michigan, maybe you should have gone to Ohio State, out the window at that point. I knew this was a place I had to be in. These are the guys that are going to help me get through, this challenge in my life, and hopefully I could return that favor to them in some way.
Wow, and you talk about Joe Paterno. I was blessed to be around Tom Izzo. And, people always said, he's so motivating. What did he say motivating to you before the games? How did he get you to play so hard? And Sean, I think about the reason why I played hard for Coach Izzo is because he cared about me. It seems like that's kind of the same thing you felt about Joe Paterno.
Yeah, Justin and I were talking just in passing last week, and that's one thing I brought up is, and it's a really good point, Mateen, is that you get to a point and when the people that are leading you, and Matt's no different than that, with the kind of example he sets is, when your day gets tough, when you're tired, when you don't feel like one more rep, when it's easy to sleep in and miss that weight workout, I always thought about the work that Joe was putting in, that his staff was putting in, that my teammates were putting in, and I can't let those guys down. Right. It was that way when I was in high school. You got to make a lot of choices. Your friends are going and doing things that, if you want to be the type of player, the type of athlete you're going to be, you can't partake in that stuff. And those challenges, it was easy to be like, man, like I can't let him down. And the same thing goes on here. I mean, everyone has good days and bad days, but when you're surrounded by people who are all putting forth 110%, I kind of sit back and say, I owe it to these people, if not for me, at least for them.
And as a leader, Sean, for the people that are on your team, is that something you tried to instill in them as well?
It is. I always, and I don't think it's happened one time yet, and I don't think I'll ever let it happen. But I lead a team of 9 other account executives, and I always make sure I'm the first person in the office. I make sure they know I'm the first person in the office for 2 reasons. Number one, when I was an account executive, just on a team, my team leaders were that way as too. Also, I want to make sure that they know I'm available for them. So that's my 8 to 9 is my hour. If you need help, if you need something, I'm going to be here for an hour. But I think kind of setting that example of what it takes, to be a senior account executive, to be a team lead, and, truly leading by example is extremely important.
And as a leader, do you lead everyone the same way, or do you adjust to each person?
Yeah, so Mike Tomlin with the Steelers had one of the greatest expressions that I try to fit into everything I do, and it was fair but not equal. So, and I'm sure, Mateen, as you got to the NBA and, some of your experiences, you saw similar things where, Tomlin treated everyone fairly, but that doesn't mean everyone's being treated equally. So I always use the example, we had, Heath Miller as a starting tight end who was an all-pro kind of guy. Heath Miller can take off a day of training camp. Sean McHugh can't. Heath Miller can sit out this extra conditioning. Sean McHugh can't. So I think that's kind of how I try to lead now. Everyone needs something a little bit different. There is no one cookie cutter, one size fits all approach. And it's one of the fun things about being a leader is trying to figure out what makes each individual tick and how to reach each of them.
So you come back. You mentioned the leg injury. You break your leg your sophomore year. You come back after that. What was the remainder of your Penn State career like, leading up to the time when you were considering playing professionally and your NFL prospects were on the horizon?
Yeah, so I mean, the good news about broken bones is they heal, and they heal stronger than they were. They're not like ligament injuries. So I rehabbed it and came back, and fortunately, at a program like Penn State, you have some of the best training available and trainers available. So my junior year, we came out and we went on a run. I mean, we had a squad that year. Some names like Larry Johnson, first-round draft pick, Jimmy Kennedy, first-round draft pick, Anthony Adams, second-round draft pick, Bryant Johnson. So, I mean, we had just, a really talented squad, which was awesome to be a part of. And we ended up going on a pretty good run. We faltered a little bit late, lost a couple of close games in league play. Went down and played Auburn in a New Year's Day bowl game, and had just an awesome year. Won a bunch of football games. The excitement was around it. And then all those guys graduated. And so my senior year, we didn't have the success that we were expected. And when you're at a program like Penn State or you're playing basketball at a program like Michigan State, expectations are extremely high, just like they are of everyone who works at UWM. You're held to a different standard. So that was disappointing. But still nothing I regret or would do differently from that standpoint. Just kind of learn from it, and hopefully you can figure out what caused that and avoid that in the future. And then kind of made that transition into the NFL. So the season ended. I hired an agent, another Penn State guy. Started leaving school for 3 or 4 days out of the week and trying to manage classes. It was a challenge, but also training, get ready for the combine. And I went through that whole circuit, which is grueling. Ended up getting drafted late in the 7th round. I was picked 241 out of 251. So there was only 10 guys picked after me. But I always joke is that, after 3 years, there was only half of us were even left in the NFL.
Wow.
So I kind of, I beat those odds. Was drafted at Tennessee and kind of had a really interesting experience of going back and forth and kind of learning what it's like to not be a star player anymore and really have to fight and claw for everything.
So 7th round pick, notwithstanding, you're in the NFL. I mean, that's a dream come true. What was the moment like when you realized that you were going to play professional football?
It's almost, and I say something about the Super Bowl is, you're so focused on what you need to do to get to that next level. Sometimes it's hard to kind of take a step back and just enjoy it. It's one of the things I work on. Even at work today, like I have a hard time enjoying any kind of success because my head immediately goes to what's next. Like, what do I have to do to repeat it? How do I get to the next level? And so it was a little bit of that. There was also a little bit of disappointment. Tennessee drafted a tight end with their first pick. I was their last pick, so we knew it would be tough sledding to make that team. But the advice my dad gave me was like, you just need an opportunity. And that's life, really. I mean, that's how it is here with, we got 500 account executives. Just give me an opportunity and then, I'll run with it from there.
So how did you deal with being cut? Because I know when I first got cut in the NBA, it was my first time ever being cut. I'm like you, I was always, one of the, if I wasn't the star player, I was one of the better players on the team. So my fourth year in the NBA, I got invited to training camp with Boston Celtics, and I got cut. And that was a devastating blow to me because that was something I never dealt with in my life.
Yeah, no, it is. It is challenging, and your whole life. You and I probably had similar high school type careers as far as the type of players we were. Obviously, we took a little different path afterwards. But you're always the best. Like you always win. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, you kind of get put in check that it's no longer that way anymore. It's a business, and they're going to take the players they feel, give them the best chance to win. It doesn't matter how hard you work. Like at the end of the day, it's what you put on tape. We used to always say the tape doesn't lie. So kind of getting that reality check was a challenge. And I always tell a lot of people don't know I played 6 NFL seasons. I was actually cut 9 times during those 6 years. So you do the math, that's, more than once a year I had the general manager telling me I wasn't good enough to be part of that football team.
Oh, and you mentioned, Sean, the business side of things. The business side of football is something I've heard you talk about. You had that experience very early on in Tennessee with, as you mentioned, another draft pick that they had, correct?
Yeah, they did. They drafted a kid. He's a great tight end out of Florida. His name was Ben Troop. Super talented, more of a receiving tight end. And, to be quite honest, I outplayed him in the preseason. But part of the business is when you invest this kind of money into an early pick, we're going to make sure that our early pick plays. But I always thought it was funny because we would joke anytime a tight end needed to be in pass protection, it was McHugh out there, not Troop, because they needed to ensure that quarterback was upright. And it actually came to the point where after our first preseason game, they came to me and said, hey, you're not going to make the team on the active roster because Ben Troop is, and we're going to keep our other 2 tight ends. However, we want you as an insurance policy, essentially, so we're going to bring you onto our practice squad. We're worried someone's going to take you off of waivers when we release you, so we're not going to play you the next 3 preseason games. Hurting my chances to catch on with a different team. But again, that's the business. You're a commodity. You're what can you do for me on the field? How can we leverage you to make our team better? It's not about what's best for Sean. It's what's best for the Tennessee Titans.
I mean, how do you deal with that, especially after, like you said, the relationships that you had built from high school into college, and then it's like this, I would have to imagine it's like a slap in the face realizing that this is a business, and while it may not be personal, it's still got to be tough to handle.
Yeah, it really is, and that whole it's just business, it's not personal. You got to keep reminding yourself of that. There's a lot of good people in the NFL, coaches, general managers, individually sitting down. You could always have that man-to-man kind of talk, but the reality of it is that it's still a business. And so they're making business decisions, what's best for the business, and that's winning football games. And if they don't feel that you're one of the 53 that's going to help them win football games, then you suddenly become expendable. And it does take a little bit of while to kind of swallow your pride and understand that maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, and you got to go back to work.
I think one thing people have to realize is, and what I'm taking from you is, you have to believe in yourself. Because if you continue to listen to people tell you what you can't do, that can hurt you. So you must believe in yourself. And second of all, you always need someone in your corner that you can trust. And to me, it seems like Dad was in your corner. He could be that voice of reason when you needed it.
He absolutely was, even from an early age. And it was never pushing me, you got to do this, you got to be great. All my dad ever taught me, and it's what I try to teach my kids, is whatever it is that you're doing, be the best at it. Take pride in what you do. I used to always laugh. I would cut the grass as a kid, and my dad would pay me $10, and we had 3 acres of grass.
Wow.
And he would walk around the yard, and he'd come back, and he'd say, "You're not done." What do you mean, Dad? And he'd point, and I'd get the mower back out, and he would always say, if you're gonna do something, do it to the best of your ability. So having someone to kind of remind you of that, is absolutely imperative. But I think you really touched on, the biggest point, Mateen, is that at some point in your life, and multiple times in your life, you got to look the man in the mirror, and you got to decide, I'm not going to let someone else, dictate my successes or my failures. It's on me. And it's also one of the things I think is really freeing when you feel that, hey, you know what, it's up to me. I can decide my path and my future. It's a pretty cool thing.
So you get cut by the Titans, and from there, it was Green Bay, right? You get to go to one of the most storied franchises in the NFL with the Packers.
It was, and it was awesome. I had a blast. I don't know if my wife was as excited to go from Nashville to Green Bay, Wisconsin, but I'll never forget walking into that locker room and seeing Brett Favre, Amon Green, Donald Driver, Javon Walker, some players that I watched just a few years ago as a high school kid or early years in college. And getting to be in a huddle. I remember my first time I was in a huddle with Brett Favre, and he's got a big grin on his face, and he was always a clown and joking around, but truly a professional at the same time. And that was just an awesome experience. I don't know if either of you have been to Green Bay, but there's not a whole lot going on in Green Bay, so that team becomes very, very close.
So, by the way, what kind of leader was Favre? What'd you learn from him?
So he wasn't a real vocal guy. Especially in the quarterback position. Some guys are I'm going to come in here and, call the squad up. Brett had a confidence about him where you just believed, you were never out of a game. And just his approach, it's, the guy's been in the league forever, did it at extremely high level, still enjoyed it every single day though. And that's what I learned from him is, it's a game. Yes, it's our business. It's how we earn a living. But it's a short window you get to play and to really enjoy it. I don't think anyone enjoyed playing football more than Brett Favre did.
So from Green Bay and the Packers, storied franchise, to the Detroit Lions, they didn't exactly have a track record for success. Yet you're coming to a team that you spent the most amount of time with in your career, right?
Correct. Yeah, I was here for 3 years, and the whole fun of me go talk about the business of it. The only reason why Detroit brought me in the first place is because they're in the same division as Green Bay. So as soon as I got released by Green Bay at the end of the next training camp, I was in Allen Park. In a coach's meeting, drawing up Green Bay's red zone offense and their short yardage offense.
Tell me everything you know.
I mean, that's really what it is.
Yeah.
And they don't hide it. But again, it's that opportunity. So you brought me in. You're going to give me a helmet and shoulder pads. I'm going to get a chance to go on that practice field. And so you give me the opportunity. I'm going to take advantage of it and keep myself there for a little while.
What was that experience like? Being with the Lions, you got to play a significant amount, compared to your previous stops. What were some of the ups and downs you experienced in your time with the Lions?
Yeah, so I got cut, it seemed like every other week with the Detroit Lions. So one of the tough things about football is, the limit of guys that you can actually dress. So we have 53 guys on an active roster, only 46 can actually be suited up. So the numbers game becomes tricky. So I'd be on the active roster, and then they'd have to bring someone up to the active roster because we had an injury. So I'd go down to the practice squad. You kind of go back and forth, and that's, I think, 6 of those 9 times being cut were, with Detroit in those 3 years. But at the same time, I made some really awesome relationships, some people I stay in touch with today. And then my third year in Detroit is we started the season like 7-1 or 6-2, and there was excitement around Detroit. We ended up kind of being the same old Lions at the end, if you will. But learned a lot there, and met some of the great people. And I think out of my whole career of playing football, that's kind of those years that shaped me the most.
And one thing when I'm sitting here listening to you, Sean, and one thing I'm taking from you is you have to stay ready. A lot of people complain about things that they have no control over. To me, it just seems like you stayed ready, and when your opportunity came about, you were ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, and what was your line from Matt's podcast about opportunity versus luck and being prepared?
Yeah, luck. Yeah. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
That's exactly it. So, and that's how we did it when I was in high school. It's how I was coached. It's how I was raised. And that's how, Joe coached us at Penn State is you don't know when your opportunity is going to come, but you better be ready. And that's, that's life. That's what, this job is for us now is it's opportunities. You can't dictate when they come, but what you can do is control how prepared you are. And the hard part in the NFL is preparing and not having that opportunity come, and it goes a year, it goes 2 years, and kind of keeping that, self-control to continue to prepare because, again, you don't know when the next opportunity is going to come.
You mentioned your dad as somebody who was obviously a mentor for you. In your NFL career, was there a teammate or a coach, somebody that you would point to as a mentor who helped you get through some of those times where you had to battle adversity?
Yeah, and one of my favorite stories I like to share with people is how I got from Detroit to Pittsburgh. And, not to get too much into the business side of football, but after my third season in Detroit, I had a pretty successful season, and we had a tight end who had been around the NFL for a long time. His name was Dan Campbell. He ended up going on and being the head coach of the Dolphins for a short period of time. I think he might coach with the Saints now, or did coach with the Saints. But after that third year, I was kind of feeling good. Like I finally had my opportunity. You know, I'd started 12 or 13 games with Detroit, had played well enough where I thought, you know, at least the backup role when Dan came back would be kind of mine. They brought in a tight end in free agency, which is, again, something I can't control. And I still felt really good. And I remember going into our second preseason game, walking into that locker room. And I don't know how it is in basketball, but we always had like depth charts kind of on like a whiteboard, and you would kind of see where you fell. And one of the big indicating factors of if you were going to make a team or not as a tight end or a linebacker, or kind of that, you know, special teams type player is your special teams depth chart. So I remember seeing that I had, you know, kind of slid down special teams depth charts for that preseason game. We were playing the Cincinnati Bengals. And so I kind of knew at that point, you know, you find the offensive chart instead of being the starter. Now I'm going in the second half. And I remember being so disappointed and so mad. And my first kind of inclination was to give the whole woe is me, I'm getting screwed, it's not fair. I remember going and sitting at my locker, who I sat right next to Dan Campbell, and Dan's still recovering from a busted triceps. And just kind of venting and complaining and, you know, giving him the business as we do in a locker room about how it's not my fault, it's the coaches, they did this. And I won't repeat on air what Dan said to me, but he had some choice words for me, which is what I was expecting. I was expecting him, you know, to kind of, you know, wallow with me.
The boo-hoo party.
Exactly. And Dan essentially said, you know, stop feeling sorry for yourself. And I remember saying to Dan, well, you know, why does it even matter now? And Dan kind of echoed that, what I'd been drilled in my head forever, was that it matters, Sean, because you're doing it, right? So you're going to have an opportunity, whether it's in the first half or the second half tomorrow night, to go out and play football. And, you know, and here's a guy who's got a torn triceps, and he's like, there's millions of people who would trade spots with you immediately. And that's kind of where that story about getting to Pittsburgh goes, is I took Dan's advice, and I remember it being so sobering to hear that from someone when I was expecting something completely different out of him. I ended up going out in Cincinnati, and I didn't play at all in the first half. And I don't know if anyone watches preseason football in the second half, but I'm sure my wife had the game off. My dad probably turned the game off at that point. I mean, no one's watching. Guys got their shoulder pads off eating sunflower seeds. And then I got to try to get warmed up and go in. And I took those words that Dan told me to heart, and I ended up probably playing the best half of football I'd played in my entire life. And, you know, didn't change the outcome with Detroit, but I remember just feeling really good about it. And, you know, we came back in, and, you know, I'm getting props from Rod Marinelli and, you know, Mike Mart. I mean, it was awesome. And then kind of back to reality, you know, the next week we play the Cleveland Browns. I roll my ankle, have a high ankle sprain. You know, we had another fullback / tight end they put on injured reserve, so now I'm feeling back to it's my spot again. We get through final cuts, and, you know, we're sitting in that meeting room with Rod Marinelli, and he does a whole speech. This is our 53 players right here, guys. This is who we're going to the Super Bowl with, like every NFL team says before the season starts, and feeling really, really excited. I've just found out my wife was pregnant with our second. I mean, things were going great. And then getting ready for that first week, I remember sitting in my locker, tying my shoes, and the little intern came up to me and said, Millen needs to talk to you. So that's Matt Millen, our general manager. And I always joke because I knew Matt Millen wasn't going to offer me some lucrative contract extension to be a second or third string tight end. And he released me. And that was probably the toughest blow I had as far as getting cut in my NFL career, because I truly felt that I had a spot. We had bought a house here, you know, 2 months earlier. Everything was kind of settling into place. Then all of a sudden, it got all, you know, flipped upside down.
Did you? Let me just interrupt for 1 second. At that point, you know, like you said, you thought you'd made the team. Your wife's pregnant. You'd bought a house. You were in that room, the meeting where they say, "This is the squad. This is the roster," and then that all gets taken away. Did any part of you at that point consider walking away from football?
100%. Yep. I remember after I got released, I was so mad. You know, I had my ankles taped. I left every single thing I had in my locker. They actually shipped it to me in a big box. I went home, you know, in my practice clothes. I remember calling my wife on the way home, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And because she knew I was supposed to be at practice, and I said, "I just got released." And then I said to her at that point, you know, maybe it's time I hang him up. And my wife said to me, like, "Do you think you can still play?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And she's like, then go play. And so, always having those people, whether it's Dan, whether it was my dad, whether it was my wife, whether it was a teammate, you always need someone in your corner to kind of pick you up. As much as I like to think that I'm this rock and I can do it all on my own, I can't. I realize that now. But then, the funny part of the story is the next day, just kind of sitting at home, and my agent texts me and says, "Hey, make sure you keep your phone open." And all of a sudden, my phone rings, and it's the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Bengals say, "Hey, Sean, you remember when you played, down here a couple weeks ago in the preseason? Like, you think you can do that for us for the next 17 weeks?" And, absolutely, coach. And Marvin Lewis, I always respected him in the way he coached, so I'm like, this might be a good fit. And then all of a sudden, the phone rings again, and it's a 412 number, and it's Mike Tomlin. And Mike Tomlin, he told me the story. He said they were scouting Cincinnati because they're in the same division. They play them twice a year, and they were actually scouting Cincinnati's defense. And he said, all the scouts come in and say, "I know you want us to break down Cincinnati's defense, but you got to see this kid from Detroit. We think you should take a look at him." And just because that second half of football, when I was feeling sorry for myself, when I could have gone through the motions, but when Dan Campbell, says, "Hey, it matters, Sean, because you're doing it," or my dad saying, "Be the best at, everything you do," and going out and playing that half of football is ultimately what got me an opportunity to join the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Man, Sean, that's a powerful story. And I think I hope our listeners are really paying attention, because you never know who's watching. I don't care if it's in sports. I don't care if it's in business. It could be your team lead. It could be an AVP. It could be the president of the company. And you have people that walk around and sometimes feel unappreciated, where my boss, or around here we say team lead or whatever, but didn't congratulate me, or they don't notice what I'm doing. And you never know. There's been people that's moved up to team leads, AVPs, by just coming to work, grinding every day like you, Sean. You just kept working. You didn't know. You had no clue it was other teams watching you. You just went out there and played hard, and something good came about it.
No, you're exactly right. And I never went out, in that Cincinnati preseason game playing for Detroit thinking, well, maybe the Steelers are going to be watching this game. Maybe the Bengals will be reviewing. It never entered my mind. And it's one thing that's really benefited me later on in life, because it's hard, to come in and grind every day and work every day and not feel like you're getting noticed, not feel like you're being recognized. But just like you said, you don't know who's watching, when they're watching, and you don't want to be the guy who slips up when that opportunity comes and you miss it because you took a day off, you took a play off, you took a call off. You can't afford to do it, because those opportunities are going to pass you by and they're going to go to the next guy.
And you famously, or infamously, however you want to say it, go from a Lions team that would go 0-16, worst record in NFL history, to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you win the Super Bowl. I mean, could you ever have imagined in your wildest dreams?
Justice.
And I burned every bridge with the Detroit Lions during that time, and I'm not going to apologize for it. No, it was awesome, and it's and again, we talk about things you can control and things you can't control, and I don't ever look at things as being lucky. I think of them as being, good fortune. And it was a culmination of a lot of hard work, going back to high school, to Penn State, going through, the adversity of dealing with losing my mom and a broken leg, and, being a 19-year-old kid, and kind of, getting kind of hardened up, if you will, over the course of the time. And it was kind of finally that moment where, that ring, no one can ever take that away. All of a sudden, the training camps don't matter anymore. The getting cut doesn't matter anymore. Those tough phone calls home to your wife telling her we got to move again, find an apartment, don't matter anymore. And it's still surreal. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around it. It's gotten a little bit easier now that my son's interested, because we'll go back and we'll watch, we talk about it. But it was certainly a blessing that I'll forever be grateful for.
And you're on the championship team, and going through that season, I think it's such a bond that you create, that you have. Like, it's more like a family. I know me at Michigan State, I won a national championship there, and it was a bond. I looked at those teammates as brothers. Was that the same chemistry or feel that you guys had in Pittsburgh?
Without question. And there's something about the culture that the Rooney family has built, with the Steelers that I think, facilitates that, much like we have here. But, you took a guy who I was in a training camp with, 85 other guys a week before, and now I come into a team, and then the stark reality of it is that just like I had been released, someone from the Pittsburgh Steelers got released, and that was their friend, that was their brother, and here comes this guy from, Detroit, took someone's spot that they cared about, but the way they embraced me, the way they brought me along, the way they reached out to my family to make the transition easier, there's something unique, and I can't put my finger on what it is. I'm sure it's what you experienced at Michigan State, but that bond is just, I don't think I'll ever have it again.
By the way, I want to thank both of you for reminding me that there's 3 of us sitting in this room. 2 of you have championship rings. One of us does not. So thank you both for that. I will never get one, but I'll just have to, admire yours. Maybe I can wear it sometime.
Well, we're family. If you want to wear it,
man,
I got you.
I'll wear that thing around the office proudly. Sean, that moment, though, being on the field, winning a Super Bowl, and like you said, reflecting back on everything you went through, cut 9 times in 6 seasons, all the hard work it took to get to that moment. What was that like? Being there in that moment, knowing you are a Super Bowl champion?
It's. I don't think you can explain it. I've never been able to articulate it very well, and it's been 10 years now since it happened. But it's overwhelming emotions, and it was awesome. My dad and my stepmom were there. My son, who was just about 2, was there. My wife's 6 months pregnant with our daughter at the time. My wife's family was there. And being down on that field afterwards. It's the stuff you watch on TV when they're bringing the trophy out and you see guys got their kids or their girlfriends or their wives, and you always wonder, what that would be like. And to actually be in that position, and you're just kind of looking around and there's still glitter floating in the air, and they're passing the Lombardi and it's gross and sticky and everyone's kissing it and it's nasty and there's sweat and blood and snot. I mean, it's just, it's such a unique experience. That I'm so grateful I got to experience and be able to share it with my loved ones and be down there. But again, I wish I had a better way. I wish everyone could experience that feeling. I'm sure, Mateen, when you won the national championship, it's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, which is what I think makes it so cool, because unless you live it, I don't think you ever really know.
Right. And Magic Johnson told me something the night we won a national championship. He said, you won't appreciate it. He said, you'll appreciate this much greater, better 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. Right now, he said, you're in the moment. But he said, it'll get better and better as you get older. Is that kind of the same thing for you?
Yeah, there's no question. You say the 10-year thing. It's funny. This past December, I actually missed our company work party, which is there's one event you want to be at. It's that, because it's always really cool.
Oh, yeah.
They got Ludacris there.
It was epic.
But the Steelers hosted a 10-year and a 30-year reunion for the Super Bowl teams. So I went there, and now my son is 11 years old. My daughter's 9 years old, who, they've seen the videos, they've seen the pictures. But the Steelers, being the first-class organization that they are, did it at a level that we didn't ever expect. So out of the 53 guys on that roster, we had about 45 of them were back. All my closest friends and position guys were back. We got to tour the locker room. My 11-year-old son got to meet Antonio Brown, literally in tears afterwards, getting to meet his hero. Walking in the tight ends room and seeing the picture of, our position room from the Super Bowl, up on our position coach's walls, seeing the Lombardi trophies with my picture behind it, being recognized at halftime. It was just incredible, to be down in the locker room with some of the older guys, Franco Harris, Mean Joe Green, Jack Lambert. It was incredible. And to what you said, Mateen, the more I've been away from it, the more I appreciate it. And now even that, my son and daughter are older, they can kind of understand the magnitude of what it means to win that game.
And what a way for you to kind of put a bow on your professional career, because that was basically it for you, right? It was not long after you win the Super Bowl that you decided that you were going to hang him up.
Yeah, so the Super Bowl was the last regular season game that I played in.
Wow.
Like I said, I had the knee surgery. I sat out the following year. I tried to come back, but again, I wasn't, what I needed to be to have an opportunity to make that team and help them win football games. So that was the last time I, played in a real NFL game, was the Super Bowl, which to me couldn't be a more fitting way to kind of go out on my own terms, if you will.
Who can say they won their last game?
Unbelievable. Not many guys. So at that point, you're thinking to yourself, what's next, right? Because you're not even 30 years old. Your playing career's done. So what are you thinking to yourself about what's going to come next for you?
It's one of the scariest parts about being done. I decided, right when I got done, Like I said, I wasn't going to fly to this city or go to that city. I told my agent, hey, listen, if it's one of these two teams and they're interested, I'll consider going in and working out for them. But if it's not, tell them I'm not interested. 'Cause I was tired of it, to be completely honest. I wanted to enjoy my son. I wanted to enjoy our daughter in those early years with them. So we took a year off. I went and bought a big fifth wheel camper, and we packed it up, and the family, we just tore around the Midwest and a little bit of the East Coast and just had fun. But I'm sure Mateen, as you can relate to, eventually that fun ends. And just kind of like a what's next, and you're 30 years old, and you got to figure out, what am I going to do for the next 30, 40 years of my life?
So why sales? Why mortgages? I know you talked about your dad putting you in connection with Matt Ishbia here at this company, but did you think it was going to be something to do with sales in particular?
No, I honestly had no idea. I really didn't, but once I came in here and I saw those coins on people's desks, and I learned what those were, I like to be ranked. I want to know. I want to see where I stand. I want to see how I stack up against, my fellow teammates or my fellow coworkers in this situation. So that kind of intrigued me. And then that's when sales kind of, started creeping to my head, that also you're in control of your income. You're in control of your job, of your career, of your future. So that was something that was really intriguing to me the more I learned about the way things are done here.
Now, you said you wanted to be ranked, so I'm sure that had to come from the sports background, from being ranked in high school and college and being those type of teams. Now, okay, so say you are ranked and you're not where you want to be. What did you do about that?
We're talking about here at work now?
Here at work, yeah. We're here at work. Okay, so, you're on that list because you're an A now, and you're not where you want to be. So what was that?
We put our production standings visible for everyone in the company to see every single day. And I could tell you exactly where my production has been. I could probably go back a month and say I was this, I was 12th, I was 9th, I was 15th, because it changes every day in this business. But when I knew that UWM was for me, was the first time I pulled up those rankings and I got that pit in my stomach because I wasn't where I wanted to be. And that's how I knew, okay, this matters. Like you care, right? Like you get it. Like there's only certain things that give me that pit in my stomach, and I'm like, man, I'm not where I want to be. I got to go find some help. I got to work harder. I got to get in earlier. I got to stay later. Whatever it is that I needed. But that's when I knew, because I couldn't wait to get in the next day and check, and the next day and check, and the next day and check to see if my work was paying off. And again, you have ups, you have downs. It's a tough business to be in. But that really is when I kind of knew, like, all right, like this is where I need to be.
When did you get to the point where you knew this was something that you could be good at? Because obviously you knew that you were good at football. You excelled at every level. It took some time in the NFL, but you ended up winning a Super Bowl. When did you have that moment when you knew that being in the business world, being in sales, you could excel?
Yeah, that's tough, Justin. I don't know if I've had that moment yet.
Really?
We had an expression. Mike March, who was one of the greatest minds in football I was ever around, used to always say, once you think you got it, you're screwed. and that's how we approach. So I never try to let myself think I'm good at it. I'm not the top producer in our company, so there's room to get better. So I think, after getting a little bit of confidence, maybe after a year and a half of it, and being more comfortable, I think once I started to pick up the phone or reach out to, my clients without being as nervous and feeling like I was in control now of the phone calls and the conversations, is kind of maybe when I started to at least get more comfortable in the role. But I'll never say I'm good at the job, and until my name's number one and then there's 499 below it, I still got a ways to go.
Speaking like a true professional, I will never ever forget this statement. Someone asked Denzel Washington, what's his best movie? And I'm like, oh my God, I was going to name off like 10.
Yeah, it's training day. Everyone knows that.
He said his response was the next one. And that just gives me chill bumps every time I think about that. And it just seems like that's the mentality that you have every day you come into work.
It's got to be, especially in this business. I mean, it's a difficult business. It's cutthroat. Matt always talks about it. Like, we all do mortgages. Our competitors do mortgages. There's only so many things you can do. So what separates us from the guys down the road or the guys across the country? And it's always what's next. Matt has an expression that I've kind of adapted myself, which is that, never relax. Because as soon as you relax, the guy behind you's past you. And it's hard to be in front. And there's another expression. Hopefully I don't butcher it, but it's something that's kind of be like it's easy to stay hungry when you haven't ate. It's hard to stay hungry when you're well fed. And the reality of it is here at UWM, we're well fed. We're crushing people and still growing. So it's how do you stay hungry? How do you can close 200 loans. Why not 300? Why not 400? So it's those kind of things. That's what I love about being here, because I know Matt's not relaxing. He's not, resting on his laurels. He wants to be better, which again is going to make all of us better.
And we talked earlier, Sean, about the lessons that you can take from sports and translate over to business. Now, in your position as a team leader, where you have 9 other people, like you said, on your team, what do you find to be the biggest lesson that you are constantly going to from your playing days and using to motivate the people on your team here?
Yeah, so I think kind of some of the things we touched about when you don't know when that opportunity is going to hit. So I'm very fortunate to work with a few accounts that are really high producing accounts, but they didn't start that way. They didn't come into the company that way. One of my accounts, I remember I've called the woman for 6 months, never picked up the phone, and I was literally, I needed one more dial to hit my effort metrics, and I'm like, I'll just call this contact 'cause I know she won't answer, and I can get out of here right on time at 6 o'clock, and sure enough, she picked up. And fortunately, because I had really good leaders that I, worked with, I was ready for it. And it's, 2 years later, and she's one of my top producing accounts, and constantly one of the top producers in her state. But it's just trying to teach them that, like, you don't know, and the job is difficult. It really is, especially when you're new, because things aren't clicking, and then you have people around you who are starting to do well, and you start to feel maybe they're doing something I'm not doing, or so it's being able to share those stories and those experiences. I always laugh. I remember I had a really good month when I was just about a year. Kind of thought, well, I got this, and then my next month was, borderline, are you still going to have a job here? And just being able to share that with them, that, yeah, it's easy to look at the production and see these guys that have been here 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years and their numbers, but they didn't start that way. You talk to any one of these guys or gals, they'll tell you that there were ups and there were downs, and it's making sure that those newer guys who are struggling, maybe lacking the confidence or questioning their decision, understand that and how to persevere through that.
Well, you being humble aside, some people are fortunate to find success in one career. Not many are fortunate to find success in 2. When you reflect back on everything from your football playing days to winning a Super Bowl to now coming into a company like this and having success in the business world, what comes to mind for you?
If you look at both, I think, one common thing is surround yourself with the best people you can and then outwork everybody. And if you can do those 2 things, I don't care what it is you're doing, I don't care what it is you're passionate about, but if you can check those 2 boxes, again, surround yourself with amazing people and outwork everybody, you can't fail.
Well said.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Sean, this has been great. It was awesome listening to your story about your career and everything that you've learned along the way, and we love having you on our team. And like I said, bring that Super Bowl ring in sometime. I just want to at least get a look at it.
Not a chance.
Right.
No, you're going to open up about the Patriots, and then now you're going to close.
Oh, man. I knew I should have talked about that.
I'm just kidding. Most Massachusetts guys will take care of each other.
Where do you keep the ring, by the way?
So I'm an avid outdoorsman. So I have a large gun safe that I keep all of my sporting firearms locked away, and it sits right in there, and it maybe comes out 2 or 3 times a year.
Well, hopefully I'll be here on one of those 2 or 3 times. Sean, we appreciate the time. Thanks for sharing your story.
It, guys.
To make sure you never miss an episode of Power Forward, subscribe wherever you find your podcasts, and look for another new episode coming your way in 2 weeks featuring more inspirational stories of success. I'm Justin White. We'll see you next time on Power Forward.